Well, welcome back. You heard about enterprise development. Let me move on to frugal innovation now. And so you heard about working with companies, and you heard it from Virginia Cha as well as from Vinod. Well, in frugal innovation, we are looking at it slightly different. We're looking at market needs. And okay, for a start, these courses are conducted every Monday, starting from 11th of January. It's also a 13-week course. And you can see from the screen, we run it once a year, only in January. So that's for your information. And moving on, an example of a problem statement, as you can see on the screen, is like, what if you have aqua waste, bio waste, sitting in the bottom of prawn farms in places like Sabah in Indonesia, and this can be hazardous for the environment. But how can we turn it around? This was one of the previous problem statements. So it is this kinds of market-led problem statements that we're looking at. And you have an example of a prawn farm in Indonesia that you see here. Similarly, you have other kinds of problems, and I know Norman is online at the moment. He went on this particular project to India to look at farmers and moisture in the ground and monitoring that and how that impacts the crops in India. So at some point, maybe I'll let Norman say a few words if he's available. And there are many other problems that we could look at. Like in this case, MAP Plastics is a company in Singapore making like 1 billion parts every year, but they have problems where they have issues with having high labor-intensive processes that they wanted to look into and detect, errors and faults and in quality, which are solely human reliant. And so the team worked on those kinds of problems. Here is yet another type of problem, which is to do with a whole system level thinking about waste management in Singapore and recycling. So these problems are many, and they can be pretty ambiguous in the beginning. You have to figure out the problem and see how to figure out solutions. And it's all about solutions, which is not just technology, but also people and thinking both at the detail level as well as the system level. And so I want to talk to you about life. Life is very ambiguous. Life is very chaotic. How do we make sense of this? And this is the kind of struggles we have to face in frugal innovation. So we help you to, again, you hear the word thinking out of the box kind of thing, but you know what? Sometimes you don't always have to look only at technology. There may be solutions out there that are already solving similar problems elsewhere. How can we combine? How can we look at not just solutions, but methods that others have used? How can we incorporate those to solve our problems? So these are the kind of questions that you will be looking at when you try to do frugal innovation. I'll give it to you. It's a little bit more out there compared to a bit more straightforward type courses. It's very experiential, a lot of discussion, and you literally have to think in various ways to try to solve these problems. Here's an example of one of the projects, Paper Breath, where they're looking at children with type 1 diabetes in rural areas, and sometimes it's life and death when they can't detect if they have too high a level of sugar in the body. And here is one medical student came up with the idea that you can just use a piece of paper, a chemical on a paper, to be able to detect it, called it Paper Breath. Today, it's a startup in Singapore. So I can keep going on, but at this point, I wanted to invite Norman, are you there? And Yonghao, would you like to come? Or would you want to, yeah, maybe you should come over here and say a few words about your experiences.
Norman is on.
Norman is on?
Yeah.
Okay, Norman, would you like to speak?
Sure thing. Thanks, Prof. Vinicius. Okay. Thanks for having me here and to talk a little bit more about the frugal innovation that I've taken 2 to 3 years back. Yeah. So as Prof. Prof. Ignatius and Prof. Vino has mentioned, this is indeed a very experiential learning, and I still feel that the things that I've learned like 2 or 3 years back, right, is still very relevant and applicable. So for Frugal Innovation, right, I've like actually taken a trip to India that time, and it was very messy, and it was a very good experience to talk to different people of different sectors in that area. So as Prof. Ignatius had mentioned, I was there on a trip to about the soil moisture and sensing kind of project. So in that sense, I learned of how to evaluate market opportunity and how to validate and invalidate ideas. So throughout the course, I made a lot of mistakes as well, but I learned through that, and now I know that now I'm good at building good rapport with people, and then I do have the support of the IEL people as well, like Prof. Ignatius, Prof. Vino, and Randall. So I can I pass it back to you, Prof. Ignatius?
Thanks,
Yeah,
Norman.
okay.
Thanks for sharing your
Yeah.
experiences. We also have Yong Hao standing by. Yong Hao, would you like to comment on your experiences?
I took the module last year, so I was with the team with MAT Plastic. So actually, my recommendation is actually for all postgraduates for working on research-related projects, and if not have any industrial experience, it's an eye-opener. So working with Math Plastics really made me see, the industry is very far removed from the lab. And coming up with ideas on how to do things in a frugal manner to solve a particular problem rather than just kind of like blue sky research. Really, it's different. It's different. It brings you one step closer to the real world. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you. So with that, let me share my screen again. And so moving on, so you heard a little bit from the people who have gone through the course itself. So you get a feel for what the course is like. Now moving on, and if I can click on the screen here. So let me now talk about the projects for this semester. The very first one is EPR. Singapore is coming up with a new law, rather has come up with a new law called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. All producers of products, their packaging materials, whatever boxes, etc., need to be recycled, and the responsibility falls with the producer themselves, the manufacturing companies. And this is coming into effect next year. And companies are having to deal with this. How can we manage this? So this whole project is about helping at a system level and an engineering level, figuring out how to help companies to recycle their packaging materials under this new law. So that's the first one. Next project is about pneumonia. This comes from 2 doctors. One of them is with Tan Tock Seng Hospital, another one with NUH. They have looked at this whole issue of knees. Elderly and particularly women have in Singapore about, as you can see the numbers, the 11% of women and nearly 9% of men have a problem with knees. Now the thing is they need rehab, but the trouble is in this current COVID condition, nobody can track how well they are doing their rehab at home, because going into rehab centers is also difficult. So they are coming up with ideas about how we could potentially have a wireless sensing system to detect and monitor particularly elderly persons with knee problems. So that's the project, second project. Next, we have Chip Saver. This is a very interesting one. This is about monitoring livestock. This project comes from Uruguay. So there is a team from Uruguay and Brazil that's working with us, and they've just established their company in Singapore, but they're still trying to figure out how to do in a frugal but more cost-efficient way to track livestock. And this tracking of livestock is not just for safety and security of the animals, but also to even know traceability of, if you're having a steak at your table at dinner, where does this come from? Where has this particular cow been around, and what has it been feeding on, and so on? So traceability is a big aspect as well as sustainability. So that's a very interesting project coming up from a lady called Victoria, who is the CEO of this company in Uruguay. Next, we have another one called Hacker. Now you can see from the name, it's a little bit different. This is about car and auto body parts. The thing is, accidents happen. The trouble is the body parts are so hard and like usually out of steel, they are kind of part of the problem. Now, this sponsor of this project is now turning it around and saying, how can we make the body part itself a sensor that can become part of the solution in preventing or reducing fatalities with auto accidents? So this is the next project. And finally, we have a project from SAF, the Singapore Armed Forces, where they do advanced trauma training for life support training, trauma life support training. Now, this is a very expensive proposition because they're now spending more than 100,000 for simulators for medical students to learn and medical officers to learn how to do this. And they want to have a cheaper, more frugal, but also a method that can be deployed much faster. And this need is not just with SAF, this actual need is actually a global need. So those are the 5 projects. Now, at this point, I want to pause and ask if there are any questions amongst you about the projects or even the course itself. Anybody online? Okay, with that, I'm going to move on to, well, I had a little bit about why you should take Frugal. I leave it to you. Each one is different, but I could just say these are really big problems that they're trying to solve, as you saw from the problem statements. It gives you a chance to jump into a real-world problem and trying to figure out the technology, the engineering, the system-level thought process on how to solve these kinds of bigger problems.